Let me get in front of the mic.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Corey Dibble. I'm the Director of Safety and Security here at the Port. I also do emergency management. First off, I want to say thank you. Look at this crowd. This has grown every single year, so I want to say thank you for taking the time to come here and knowing how important this meeting is. We have a good agenda today. We're going to go through everything from landside activations, notifications, and we're going to get a great presentation from the National Weather Service. But before we kick it off, pass it over to my boss, Vice President of Safety and Security, Peter Bergeron.
All right. I'm glad to hear the enthusiasm this morning. Thank you very much. Echo what Corey said. Thanks for coming. Just to give you an overview, anytime we do a hurricane response or preparation, it's actually a group effort. I mean, it's not just us at the port. So we have a unified command, which is Cap Murray, CPA, and Byron for Sheriff's Department, Dave Sargent, and Chris Quinn for the Fire Department, Steve back there for CBP, and there she is right there, Sarah for the Coast Guard, and we also use the pilots. So Rich, thanks for coming. So after the meeting, anybody has any questions about security beyond a hurricane response, I'll hang out. If you got any questions, this is your chance to get to me. Sometimes it's difficult. You're trying to reach me by phone. So that's it. Now I'm going to introduce my boss, who's the CEO, John Murray. Oh, you got some coffee.
You got a better applause.
If you don't clap for Peter, don't clap for me. Morning, everybody. Yeah, just to me, this is one of the most important meetings we have every year. It's really the one time that we can kind of share exactly what the expectations are from the port's perspective in the event of a hurricane coming our way. Every storm is different, so that's something that we need to highlight, that sometimes we'll do things for one storm that we don't do for another. Sometimes we'll say, let's get the boats out. It's all predicated on the direction of the storm and the intensity. And we have to take a look at the Weather Service, what their predictions are, and then we have to make a best guess estimate on what the best thing to do is for the port. So I think the most important thing for all of you is to look at your own circumstances, what your special needs might be, and if there are any, lay them on the table now at the beginning of the season, so when we get down to an emergency situation, we say, now you've got to do this. You don't say, well, wait a minute, I've got a different idea, I've got a different plan. Nope, too late at that point. So if you got something special, get it on the table now. But thank you all for coming. It's very important that everybody take this seriously, and like Corey said, this is a full room, and we really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Cap Murray. I'm going to need an usher to make sure everybody finds an empty seat. So, I mean, really, this is the biggest turnout we've had, and I just continue to echo that. I want to turn it over to Will Ulrich with the National Weather Service to go over the 2024 season. And I do want to just let everybody know, as we've done in the past, this meeting is recorded. So although a lot of us like to walk around, entertain, for the most part, we're going to stay here. We will have a question Q&A period later, and we have a microphone set up for that, again, because it's recorded. That way everybody can see that. You know, in the event that a storm does come and you forget some of the things we talked about, it's posted on our website. So why everybody's here, without further ado, kick it off to Will and talk about the 2024 season.
I appreciate it, Corey. Thank you very much for the invitation. We certainly appreciate it because we know the importance of all of the decisions that need to be made here each time a storm threatens Port Canaveral. So my name is Will Ulrich. I'm the Warning Coordination Meteorologist with the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. It is our area of responsibility. Brevard County is one of 10 counties that we provide weather forecasting and decision support services for. So if you find yourself here at Port Canaveral, realize that the vast majority of the weather information that you are receiving, right or wrong, ultimately originates from the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. Every time your phone goes off and says a tornado warning, a hurricane warning, or you get that 7-day forecast from Siri or Android or whatever your favorite weather app, there's a 90% chance that the vast majority of that information originates from the National Weather Service, whether it's our computer models, whether it's our satellites, whether it's our observation stations. So why not just get it directly from the source? Get it from National Weather Service Melbourne. So I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for the National Weather Service here at the beginning of today's presentation, and then talk about what y'all came for, including those of you standing in the back, standing room only. I certainly am really excited to see so many people interested in today's talk. So, National Weather Service, who are we? We're federal government. You all, as taxpaying citizens in this room, pay for the services from the National Weather Service. It is codified into congressional law that we provide warning-based decision support services to all of our partners, the public, the media, and everyone in between throughout the United States. And we do that across 122 forecast offices around the country, and not just in the continental United States, but also in Alaska, Hawaii, and our territories. So anytime, again, your cell phone goes off with a wireless emergency alert, or you get information from Siri that tells you there's a small craft advisory or a rip current advisory, or maybe even a fire weather watch, things that you probably question, why is this popping up on my phone? Understand that that information ultimately originates from the National Weather Service. There are 21 of us right now at the Melbourne office operating across 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's what it looks like on the north side of the Melbourne airport off of Croton Road. That operations floor can spin up and spin down like any other emergency operations center during a big event, so you can see up to 8 meteorologists working 12-hour shifts during those big tropical events. Now, our mission at the National Weather Service is for the protection of life and property. Again, each of you in this room pay anywhere between $5 to $10 per year to fund the National Weather Service's $1 billion budget so that we can sustain those 122 forecast offices across the country, as well as all of our national centers, which you're probably familiar with. Right down the road, National Hurricane Center in Miami. Over in Norman, Oklahoma, the Storm Prediction Center. The Weather Prediction Center up in Washington, D.C. Those are examples of national centers that provide the big picture, and then we localize that information. We hope to get to a point where society's prepared for and responds to whatever Mother Nature has to throw at us. Because if you haven't noticed, Mother Nature's pretty pissed off lately. So weather.gov is our primary source of information, takes you to the national webpage. You can take a look at any local weather forecast office by clicking on that map. So whether you're here in Brevard County or spreading across the country, just point and click anywhere on the map. It'll take you to your local National Weather Service forecast page. Again, you're in Brevard County. You are surrounded by our area of responsibility. We also provide forecast decision support services out 60 nautical miles. So when you go out into the open Atlantic, you are covered by our forecasts, whether that's through NOAA weather radio or whatever you get on our cell phone. We provide those near shore up to 20 nautical miles away from the port, and offshore waters out to 60 nautical miles. Once you get beyond 60 nautical miles, the Ocean Prediction Center in Taft B, part of the National Hurricane Center, provides those forecasts beyond 60 nautical miles. So we're here to talk about tropical storms and hurricanes, though, right? So let's get started. A common term you might hear me talk about today are tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclones is kind of the overarching definition, World Meteorological Organization's definition that we use for organized systems of showers and thunderstorms that rotate around a common area of low pressure. Now, in the Atlantic, we call them different things. We call them tropical depressions, tropical storms, and hurricanes, but they're called different things throughout the planet. Realize that the vast majority of the tropical cyclones that we receive in Florida and the United States start as clusters of showers and thunderstorms off the west coast of Africa. We see hundreds, 100 to 200 of these tropical disturbances move off the west coast of Africa every single year. Do all of them form into something? Of course not. Only a select few of them. When the atmospheric conditions and when the oceanic conditions are right, they may evolve into a tropical depression when they get a number, or a tropical storm when they get a name. But realize we're supposed to see these clusters of showers and thunderstorms move off the west coast of Africa every single day. It's part of the African westerly or easterly monsoon. This happens all the time, and it really picks up as we get further into the season, August, September, and October. When the atmospheric and oceanic conditions are right, those tropical thunderstorms begin to rotate around a common area of low pressure, and as they strengthen, they go from a tropical depression to a tropical storm and a hurricane. Now again, we call them tropical storms and hurricanes in the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean, as well as the Eastern Pacific, but they're called different things around the world, right? And they have to be near those tropical waters, near those warm waters, generally 25 degrees north or 25 degrees south of the equator. So they're called typhoons in the Western Pacific and cyclones in the Southern Indian Ocean. It's important to realize, of course, that tropical cyclones come in all shapes and sizes. I don't need to tell you that, but we need to get away from worrying about whether a system is just a tropical storm or whether it's a Category 1 or a Category 2 hurricane. We need to look at hurricanes and tropical storms from all 4 of their primary hazards. Wind is just one, and I know it's probably one of the most important to you all as boat operators, but understand there comes with it freshwater flooding, storm surge, and tornadoes as well. And there have been systems like tropical storms that have provided impacts beyond just wind. Let's go back to 2008, which should mean something to you all if you were a resident of Brevard County back in 2008. Tropical Storm Faye, quote unquote, just a tropical storm, yet it dumped 20 to 25 inches of rain here locally and led to prolific flooding, okay? Don't just focus on the wind. Don't just focus on the category of the storm. Also, don't focus on the size of a system, because just because you have a small system doesn't mean it can't be impactful. We are coming up on the 20th anniversary of the infamous 2004 hurricane season. Charlie, Ivan, Francis, and Jean all impacted the state of Florida through the course of that year. Charlie was a small, compact storm that led to Category 3, Category 4 conditions along the southwest coast. Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale kicks in once wind speeds get above 74 miles per hour, and then you see the ranking from there. But understand that these winds don't bring it with it just a linear potential of damage. In other words, a Category 2 hurricane is not twice as powerful as a Category 1. Or a Category 3 doesn't bring with it 3 times the damage potential of a Category 1. Instead, it is an exponential scale, such that a Category 2 can bring with it 10 times the damage potential of a Cat 1. Cat 3 brings with it 50 times the damage potential, and so on, all the way up to as much as 500 times the damage potential of a Cat 1. That should really wake people up here in this room, because generally speaking, Brevard County hasn't experienced anything except Category 1 conditions here locally, at least in modern history. We go back to the 2004 hurricane season, Francis and Jean. What was the conditions experienced here up in Port Canaveral? Category 1 hurricane force wind gusts. Hurricane Irma. You all didn't survive major Hurricane Irma here in Brevard County. You all didn't survive major Hurricane Ian just 2 years ago here in Brevard County. You survived the remnants of major Hurricane Ian and Irma. By the time Irma and Ian got here, it was just a tropical storm. Yet you remember some of the impacts that we had here, not just in Brevard, but all across East Central Florida. That should be a little sobering. And you can imagine what would happen if a Category 2 or Category 3 hurricane impacted our community, let alone a Category 4 or Category 5, which of course those probabilities decrease the stronger the storm we're talking about. But nonetheless, it is entirely possible. There is nothing stopping Brevard County from being impacted by a major hurricane. No, we do not have some type of magical deflector shield here in Brevard County. It is a common myth and misconception that I hear all the time that they put NASA's Kennedy Space Center here because we don't get hurricanes in Brevard County. That is false, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. The fact is, we jut out into the Atlantic Ocean. Florida sticks out like a sore thumb, and we have 900 miles of coastline that could potentially be impacted by these major hurricanes and these extreme winds. Though rare, can bring with it catastrophic impacts that, all things considered, Brevard County has not seen recently. Major hurricanes only account for about 1 in 5 landfalls of hurricanes in the United States, yet they account for 83% of all damage. Again, I want to get away from just focusing on wind, which I know, of course, is an important determining factor in our plans, but we have to look at these storms with a holistic approach. And remember that tropical storms bring with it 4 primary hazards, including flooding, storm surge, and tornadoes. No doubt the one that brings with it the greatest potential for loss of life is the bottom left, right? Storm surge, the unusual rise in the waters as a result of those strong winds and low pressure inside of a hurricane. And right here along the coast, right, in the Port Canaveral, city of Cape Canaveral area, of course, storm surge poses a significant threat if a storm comes at us from the east. So here we are 5 days into the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs from June 1st through November 30th. That encapsulates about 97% of all tropical storms and hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean, hence why we designate June 1 through November 30th as the Atlantic hurricane season. But when does the tropical cyclone season really kick in? According to this chart here, it's not until about August, right, that the frequency of tropical cyclones really starts to go up. So if we focus on that 90-day period from August 1 through October 30th, we've got about 85% of tropical cyclones occurring within that 90-day period. So the fact is, we want everyone to be ready by June 1, but you better darn well be prepared by August 1, because that's when conditions really start to ramp up. Now, am I going to sit here and tell you that we're not going to see a tropical cyclone in the months of June and July? Of course not, because the fact is we've had tropical cyclones that have impacted Brevard County, and we could see one this year. It It's too early to know. But the fact is that 90-day period is when conditions and when some of the strongest storms have ever impacted the state of Florida. Let's take a look at that. Going back 170 years, I plotted the number of hurricanes that have moved within 100 miles of that blue dot within the center of the state of Florida. 2 hurricanes over a 170-year period in June, and you see some hurricanes that have moved close, but not within that 100 nautical mile circle. 2 hurricanes over a 170-year period. Why am I showing you a 100 nautical mile ring? Why aren't I just showing you how many hurricanes have passed directly over Port Canaveral? Because you don't have to have a storm move directly over Port Canaveral to have significant impacts, right? We can have a storm system move 100 miles to our south, 100 miles to our north, 200 miles to our east, and still have significant impacts, right? Francis and Jean made landfall in St. Lucie County, 100 miles to our south, and then think of the impacts that we had 20 years ago in the 2004 hurricane season right here in Brevard County. So a tropical system, of course, is possible in the month of June. 2 hurricanes have passed within 100 miles of that blue point in southern Osceola County, 16 tropical storms. In the month of July, 5 hurricanes, 12 tropical storms, and then it all changes in August. August is when conditions really ramp up, when the water temperatures are warm enough and the atmospheric conditions favor those stronger, long-tracked hurricanes that come off the west coast of Africa. Notice the direction in which storms are moving in the month of August. They are coming at us from the south and east, the most dangerous direction for us here in Brevard County. Look at the vivid colors as well. Those Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes are more likely in the months of August and September. Those, statistically speaking, have been when the biggest storms have impacted the state, especially South Florida. You see the vast majority of the lines, of course, are across South Florida. There are lesser here in Brevard, but nonetheless, we have had major hurricanes pass very near or over our community, and we need to be prepared for those impacts. And then everybody thinks we're done in the month of October, when in reality, October has had more hurricane hits in the state of Florida than any other month. So do not let your guard down in October. But there's a bit of a change as we move into the months of fall. Where the tropical cyclones come from changes a little bit. And if you see here on the chart, the vast majority of tropical storms and hurricanes that have hit Florida in the months of October actually come at us from the south and southwest. So they usually intersect South Florida and the southwest coast more often. But there are exceptions to that. And we can look back to just about 6 or 7 years ago, I guess 8 years ago now, when Hurricane Matthew passed very near our coastline as a major hurricane down off the Treasure Coast and a Category 2 hurricane when it passed by here back in October of 2016. And then November, things really quiet down. Okay? I will say that these charts do go through 2020, so understand that there is a third line that is missing. That is Hurricane Nicole, which decided to visit us back in November of 2022. So what about this year, which I'm sure everyone here already kind of knows what National Weather Service and hurricane forecasters are expecting, and that's a relatively busy season, okay? Why are they forecasting a busy season? There's a combination of 2 factors, the first of which are water temperatures in the eastern Pacific Ocean. Yes, water temperature thousands of miles away have vast impacts on the atmospheric and global circulations across the rest of the planet. That box on the left there represents what is known as the El Niño Southern Oscillation Index, and that represents an area that we monitor water temperature anomalies. In other words, what you're looking at here is not direct water temperatures. You're looking at the anomalies of those water temperatures. Where you see blue, that means the waters are cooler than normal. Where you see red, that means waters are warmer than normal. In that part of the world right now, we're seeing cooler than normal water temperatures, which is indicative of La Niña. Okay, sometimes it cycles every 3 to 7 years between La Niña and El Niño. And right now we are seeing La Niña conditions develop and expected to sustain themselves through the upcoming summer. If you reduce the water temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific Ocean, in other words, you make them cooler than usual. I am not saying that the water temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific are cool. They are not. The average temperature is about 90 degrees. So what we're talking about is temperatures in the mid-80s or mid to upper 80s. If you cool those water temperatures below where they should be, what do you think happens to the number of tropical cyclones in the central and eastern Pacific if the water temperatures are cooler than normal? It drops. Mother Nature has a way of balancing herself out. So if you see less tropical cyclones in the central and eastern Pacific Ocean, what do you think happens in other parts of the world, including the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico? Yep, conditions become more favorable in our part of the world. So when a La Nina is ongoing in the Central and Eastern Pacific Ocean, generally that makes the atmosphere conditions more favorable for tropical cyclone development in the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and Atlantic. And then there's this whole separate thing on the right, which shows what water temperatures are in the Atlantic Ocean. How warm are water temperatures right now across the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the main development region of the Atlantic, which is that right box? Water temperatures are highly unusual for this time of year. They are well above normal, 2, 3, as much as 4 degrees Celsius, which is 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, above where they should be. The fact is, water temperatures as of late May were where they should be in late August. We are 3 months ahead of schedule in the Atlantic Ocean already. So the water temperatures reflect what we would see in late August. But what we don't yet have are those tropical disturbances that I talked about earlier. But as we move later into the season, we're going to see more of them move off the west coast of Africa. So the odds of development are high because there's lots of energy to feed off of this year. So when we see those cool and dry conditions develop, again, I'm not saying that the water temperatures themselves are cool, but they lead to cooler and drier conditions near the equatorial Pacific and the central and eastern Pacific Ocean. That leads to more hurricanes on the other side of Central America. So those two things, the warm water temperatures locally and a developing La Nina over the Central and Eastern Pacific, are the big reason why the forecast says what it says. If we go back 30 years and average the number of storms over the Atlantic Basin, we get 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. Does that mean every single year the Atlantic gets 14, 7, and 3 storms? Of course not. Some seasons are below, some seasons are above average. But when you average it over 30 years, that's what you get, 14, 7, and 3. Look at the forecast from both Colorado State University and my parent agency, NOAA, National Hurricane Center. Colorado State, which has been in the business of issuing hurricane forecasts, Dr. William Gray, all the way back to 1983, is calling for 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. That reflects a well above normal season. In fact, it's the highest numbers ever produced in their April forecast. NOAA National Hurricane Center also does it a little bit differently, but is calling for an above normal season. 17 to 25 named storms, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7. But here's the thing. All of you in this room want me to tell you whether Brevard County is going to be hit by a hurricane this year. Because at the end of the day, impacts are local, right? It could be the busiest season in the world, but if Brevard County doesn't get hit, you're going to say, another bust by those meteorologists, right? When in reality, maybe the rest of the country was impacted. I wish I could stand here and tell you whether Brevard County was going to be impacted this year, but I don't know. Our magic 8-ball that sits on our operations floor can't tell me that. All right? But what I can tell you is that busier than normal seasons are often associated with greater and more impacts in the United States. Again, we stick out like a sore thumb in here in Florida with 1,000 miles of coastline along the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. So is it more likely that we're going to see a tropical cyclone pass by or maybe right overhead Brevard County this year? Yes, the probability is higher, solely because we are forecasting more storms, and that's the only reason. But we do not have the scientific ability yet to tell you what time of year or where exactly along the United States coastline is going to see a tropical cyclone. We do not have that ability yet. So the fact is the current hurricane season outlook is just a number for the entire 6-month period, and it shows an 85% chance of being above normal. So I'll talk about some products and services available to you all, including from the National Hurricane Center, which is what you're probably most used to seeing. The tropical weather outlook is something that you can use to determine what tropical cyclones might be developing in days 6 and 7. Once a system has a number or a name, you get the potential track forecast, which is often misinterpreted, so I need to address that in just a few moments. And then tropical watches and warnings. In other words, storm surge watches and warnings, hurricane watches and warnings, things like that are all issued no more than 48 hours in advance of the start of those winds. So no more than 48 hours in advance will we issue a hurricane or a tropical storm watch. And then on impact day, when hopefully everyone is hunkered down, we might have to issue these warnings of last resort, tornado warnings, extreme wind warnings, and flash flood warnings. These are designed to get people to act to potentially save themselves from the more significant or most dangerous parts of a storm, including tornadoes and flash flooding. And if a major Category 3 hurricane were to impact Brevard County, we might need to issue an extreme wind warning, which that is whenever a Category 3 or greater hurricane moves onshore our coastline. So the 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook highlights potential areas of development. X marks the spot as to where the tropical disturbance is now, and then that hatched area represents where the system may develop over the next 7 days. Three category system. Yellow is a low chance. Orange is medium, 40 to 60% chance, and red is greater than 60% chance. Try not to use this as a track forecast. What we're trying to do is highlight areas of potential development over the next 7 days based on those current disturbances that are out there. But once a system has developed, this is probably what you're used to seeing, the infamous 5-day cone or potential track forecast, as I like to call it. This cone represents the most likely track of the center of a cyclone. But I need to stress that again. It is the most likely track of the center of the storm. Does a storm need to move directly overhead to have impacts in our community? Of course not. This is the first of many tools that you should use to make decisions. And this is issued by the National Hurricane Center 4 times a day and represents where we think the center of the cyclone is expected to go. Now, this cone is getting smaller because our ability to track where the system is going has gotten better due to scientific and technological advancements. So the cone has been getting smaller. So more and more people are finding themselves outside of the cone thinking that they're safe. And this is not to be used as an impacts decision maker. This is only meant to tell you where the center of the cyclone is expected to go. And the cone has been getting smaller through the years. But I've got some good news. We're attempting to change up the cone a little bit this year so that we can focus a little bit less on exactly where the center of the system is going to go and more on where impacts may occur. And so starting this year, August 15th, we're going to put out a secondary cone alongside the cone that you're used to seeing as an experiment to see how it goes. And on top of that, we're going to overlay tropical storm wind watches and warnings, including hurricane warnings. This example from Hurricane Ian back in September 2022 would show you what the 5-day cone, or in this case, 3-day cone, would look like in that scenario. Notice how your eyes are drawn away from the cone and more focused on where tropical storm and hurricane wind watches are in effect. Notice how small the cone is over the peninsula. And yet, tropical storm and hurricane warnings are in effect for nearly the entire peninsula. You can imagine we could get to a point where maybe we can stress not just wind, but also flooding rainfall potential, tornado potential, as well as storm surge potential as an overlay on these maps. So we stop focusing on whether or not the center of the storm is going to move directly over your community. We need to get away from that. It's part of the reason why the skinny black line was removed from the cone 4 or 5 years ago, because too many people were focused as to whether or not the line was near their home, and that simply does not matter a lot of the times. Wind speed probabilities are produced also every 6 hours. They basically take the latest forecast and provide the percent chance of seeing 34-knot winds, 50-knot winds, and 64-knot winds. And these wind speed probabilities are based off of alternative scenarios that take into account the latest forecast track and model spread or uncertainty. So they have real-time information built into it. At the same time we provide wind speed probabilities, we're also providing time of arrival graphics. 2 flavors of time of arrival graphics, including the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. This might be used by our partners who have a low risk tolerance, who want to ensure that their preparations are in place. In other words, they only have a 1 in 10 chance of seeing tropical storm force winds before the time listed on the screen. If you have a little bit more time to operate and prepare for the storm, you might use the most likely arrival time. But understand these are conditional. In other words, if tropical storm force winds were to occur in your community, you can look at the wind speed probabilities accordingly. This is when they might begin. So keep that in mind. Wind speed, time of arrival graphics are even shown for areas where the probability of wind speeds are only 5 to 10%. So again, remember that if tropical storm force winds were to occur, these would be the times that you need to prepare for. Hurricane threats and impacts graphics are the last things that I'll highlight. In other words, these help answer the question, what should we prepare for? Because as I've told you now before, that there is a lot of uncertainty associated with where the center of a tropical cyclone may go. So these hurricane threats and impacts graphics are designed to take the latest forecast and also consider those reasonable alternative scenarios so that you can prepare better for what may occur with any individual tropical system. We do this for all 4 hazards: wind, storm surge, flooding, rain, and tornado threat. And if you point and click, it's an interactive map. You can see what the latest local forecast is and what you should prepare for. We never should be asking the question, what can we expect? because that's very difficult during a hurricane situation, because small changes in the track of a cyclone can have huge impacts. And if you ask me, what can we expect? I might hang up the phone on you. What we should be asking is, what should we be preparing for? That is more important. Wireless emergency alerts are going to go off on your phones when hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings, or extreme wind warnings are in effect for our community. So if we issue for the port, Brevard County, a hurricane warning, storm surge warning, or extreme wind warning, your phone is going to go off, so keep that in mind. So my personal plea ends today's presentation with this. Please be careful of what you see on social media. There are a lot of armchair meteorologists and keyboard warriors out there that like to share spaghetti model plots, which are the bane of my existence, as well as individual computer model runs. And I know we all do it. We go to Tropical Tidbits or we go to Windy. I know you guys love Windy for some reason. It's pretty, I understand. But understand that these computer models that you see are just one of countless possibilities in an emergency situation. And they can update and change drastically from model run to model run. And so you may be making decisions based off of old computer model information that has changed drastically over the past 6 hours, and that can be dangerous. You can be making a life or death decision off of old or outdated or misinterpreted, even worse, misinterpreted information. A lot of the information that's shared on social media is really for other meteorologists, and it's not for the general public's consumption. So when you see these ensemble model plots or these spaghetti model plots, we tell you not to focus on the skinny black line in the National Hurricane Center's forecast. So why on earth would we show you anything with 100 skinny black lines? Because you guys may anchor your decision off of one of those lines, and in that it could end up being completely wrong information. The problem with individual computer model runs as well is, again, that they can change drastically. And every hurricane is resolved differently by all the different computer models out there. So please stick with trusted sources. Do not get worked up every time a meteorologist talks about a potential tropical cyclone 2 weeks from now, or uses all caps in their tweet or on their Facebook post. Use caution when migrating the waters of social media, because at the end of the day, the National Hurricane Center overperforms over any individual computer model run, whether that's the GFS, the European, or the UK Met. This is the average 4-day track error from each of those models plus the National Hurricane Center. And on the y-axis, you can see those errors. The European, the GFS average around 125 to 140 nautical miles in errors. This goes back over the past 3 years from 2020 to 2022. And then the UK Met is up there at 150 nautical miles. But look at where the NHC falls. NHC has the least amount of track error and is the most consistent. In other words, they change their forecast less than individual computer model runs do on a 6-hourly basis. And the size of the 5-day cone has gotten significantly smaller, but remember the drawbacks of the cone. The cone is only meant to tell you where the center of the tropical cyclone is expected to go. So the cone has gone from nearly 500 miles in size at 5 days to about 260 or 250 miles. At 1 day out, the size of the cone has gone from about 100 miles in radius, which is that red line, down to about 50 nautical miles. So the cone continues to get smaller. Are hurricanes getting smaller? Of course not. Hurricanes are staying the same, if not actually getting a little bit bigger, believe it or not, based on some research we're seeing. So the fact is, more people are finding themselves being impacted outside of the cone. So do not use the cone simply by itself to make those potentially life-saving decisions during an emergency situation. So I'll end here with today's presentation and show the Atlantic tropical cyclone names. I always like to see some reactions, some people's eyes light up if their name is on there this year. Normally, I don't get worked up over seeing my name on the list, but this year, there's a high probability that we're going to have a tropical storm or Hurricane William based off of the latest forecast conditions that we have from the National Hurricane Center. So we'll see what Mother Nature has to throw at us. Do we want questions now or later? Okay, we'll save them. I appreciate your time all. Thanks very much.
Will, great presentation as always. Thank you. I want to highlight Will drove it home. The forecast is high for this year, but I also want to say that it only takes one. That's what we say in the emergency management field. It doesn't make a difference. Yes, the probability is high, but it only takes one to be impacted. It only takes one to be devastated. So let's stay prepared. Let's stay heightened and continue the discussion. Next up, we're going to have the Coast Guard. I'm going to pass it to Captain Espino Young, Captain of the Port with Sector Jacksonville, and Commander Brennan with the MSU.
morning. Sorry. This is for awareness. I love the passion. I've been lucky, I say, on 12 hurricanes.
Use the microphone. They're recording.
We're recording it. Thank you.
I'll refrain then. I've been lucky in my 29 years in the Coast Guard that I've had to live through 12 storms, not responded to. They've tend to follow me. So I hate to say this. So you mentioned Jean. I got it in Puerto Rico, and Irma got that too. Maria got that one. Great. Started with Andrew. So a lifetime of my preparedness words are wishing something to be true is not a plan. So if you prepare for the worst and you allow yourself that pivot to be able to rally, as I'm sure most of you experienced with the Irma hurricanes on the West Coast, that thing changed tracks. Was supposed to go more west and ended up kind of pivoting in. So at the end of the day, that's what we're here for from a Coast Guard perspective. You know, we work with all of you as port partners to make sure that that we're sequencing, giving enough time. We are that, you know, the folks that kind of set a tone so that we're not putting ourselves in harm's way, you know, that we're 12 hours out and we're already secure and we're moving through with some exceptions. I'm sure the port doesn't want to hear that. But for us, it's really that, is giving you the ample time so that at the end of the day, when the storm passes, how quickly can we rally and get boats in the water and start the post-storm assessments and open up the port for our subject matter expert and all things planning. We'll give our presentation, but I just wanted to state how happy I am. This is a huge turnout. I love it. I don't know if it's hurricane season, but I'm loving the momentum and certainly appreciate you all being here today and making sure that we start off the season right, and that's in communications and preparations, and we're here to help at the end. Sarah.
Thank you, Captain. It's funny because I look at Captain Espino Young. We call her Captain EY. I call her the Espinopedia. She is the expert at Coast Guard Florida, and yet somehow we are surprised every time a new case or something comes up. So I just took over last summer. And just so you understand the dynamic, Captain Espino Young is the captain of the port. Even though we were upgraded to a marine safety unit, this is not our own captain of the port zone yet. We're working towards that, but my authorities are borrowed from Captain EY. So whenever there is a final decision made, Captain EY will always be a part of that decision, and it will be her at her level to veto me or anything else. But the very unique and very cool thing about Port Canaveral, which they always say in the Coast Guard, if you've seen one port, you've only seen one port, because each one is so different. And what is so unique about this port is the novel technologies and the size of the business that's done here in such a small geographic area, but also the way, even though it is so much business, the people that are owning those decisions is a very tight group, and we operate in a unified command at all times with port partners, with Brevard County, with fire department. So we are very tight. We're always talking. The pilots are involved, and it's never a unilateral decision on my part without the input of everybody. And I think last year, what I got, thank you, Will, for your presentation. I do also appreciate that passion. And I think what I took from that is, I took a lot of stuff from it. But one thing that you mentioned is that, you know, even just last year we had Adalia, which was not much, right? We can all agree that nothing really happened. However, we ran through the entire cycle and we did shut down the port. And that was just to be prepared for those tiny little changes, those one way or another kind of hits that could change everything for us in terms of storm surge, flooding, and whatever the case may be. Captain Murray is always on the ball and advocating for you as a business owner and operator here in the port. And so we have that tight relationship to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that you guys as the operators are being heard through the port commissioner, and we take all of that input into our decision making. We also have a lot of legacy operators here. Captain up here is our eyes and ears in the port, so we have a lot of people that are always talking to the Unified Command and talking to us, and I really appreciate that about this port. Everyone is so tight, and it's my teams that you'll see out there walking your piers, checking your lines, looking over everything, looking at your plans. Kyle's going to talk through, I assume, some of the heavy weather planning and remain in port kind of stuff, but one thing we will never do is put our teams in danger to open the port sooner. So we will always wait for the right time to send our teams out to do the assessment. We go with the pilots. We take, somebody from the port, myself, or somebody on my team will go out on the water with the harbor master and make sure that the buoys are aligned, the pilots feel good. We take all of those, the hierarchy of like what kind of do we have products sitting offshore that needs to get into the oil terminal? Do we have people that need to be offloaded from a cruise ship? All those things are being weighed all the time. And as local operators and, some of our tug companies, we rely on all of you guys to help be our eyes and ears. The facilities, let us know how your docks are looking after a storm blows through. Always open for that feedback, and just appreciate all of your cooperation and hearing from you all the time. I really do love that part. So I will say, unfortunately, we are trying to get the Boeing Starliner off the planet today. So Captain Eli and I are going to have to jet here to get over to that. Kyle's going to, he is our resident expert. He's the SME. He's the one that's going to be able to answer all the hard questions. And if not, he will make sure those get to us. But thank you very much for all of your cooperation, and looking forward to I'm not going to say it, just looking forward to this summer. Fantastic season, yes. Thank you.
Captain EY, Commander Brennan, thank you for that information. And I do want to say, we've talked about it multiple times. We'll all talk about it in the next couple of presentations. Unified Command is what drives actions here, and we are not making those decisions based off of what we feel. It's based off the information that we're getting from all of our agencies, all of our partners, and the people within the port. So continue the Coast Guard discussion. I'll pass it over to Lieutenant Weifer to go over Sector Jacksonville's heavy weather plan.
Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everybody. So my name's Kyle Wyford. I'm stationed up at Sector Jacksonville. I'm the heavy weather officer up there, and I'm an emergency management specialist for the Coast Guard. So my primary duty is heavy weather, and the heavy weather plan is what I work on. So that's what we're going to go over today. As you can see, the heavy weather plan is 2002 to 2024. So after this season, it's going to get a rewrite. So if there's anything that you guys, this plan is not just for the Coast Guard, it's also for you guys as port partners. So if there's anything that you guys see in there or want changed, adjusted to your specific organization, you can let me know, and we can add that in there. All right, so our heavy weather plan, everything that's in the heavy weather plan, it's more or less just a guide, right? It's a guide for the Coast Guard unit specifically, but it's also a guide for you guys as port stakeholders. I know a lot of you guys in here all have your own heavy weather plans, and a lot of you guys do use ours as a template to adjust your guys's, and so you guys have access to that. Our area of responsibility is more or less basically Kings Bay, Georgia, where the sub base is, all the way down to Malabar, which is just south of here. Sebastian, yes, thank you.
Good answer.
I was trying to think where Ponce, our station, is. Sorry, so, all right, so you guys are all SMEs for the specific area, so bear with me. So we got 3 major ports, Fernandina, Jacksonville, and then Canaveral for you guys. So it goes over hurricane conditions and port conditions. The 2 major difference between those 2 is a hurricane condition is internally for the Coast Guard. This is what we work on. There's different checklists and things that we have to do to prepare for that hurricane to arrive. And then port conditions is going to be things for you guys specifically to the port. It goes over Coast Guard unit and personnel preparedness and things that we have to do to prepare for storms, and then things for you guys to prepare for, and then pre and post-storm actions and operations. So you can actually see specifically what we are doing when a storm's coming. You can see this is exactly what the Coast Guard is doing, pre-storm as well as post-storm. To get access to this, you can go to our home port website, and there's the link if you want to take a picture. So you go to home port. Within home port, you go to the port directory from tab, and then from port directory, you'll see Jacksonville. And then from Jacksonville, you go to the local contingency plans, and then within that plan, you'll see the actual plan. There's a few other plans in there as well, but specifically the heavy weather. All right, so port preparedness. So chapter 4 of this plan goes over our pre-storm procedures, outlines what we are going to be doing prior to the storm. Port conditions, who, what, where. Port Canaveral is not suitable for refuge for these vessels. We have remain in port liaison officers who are specifically experts at large vessels like this. And then Yankee vessels need to be departing before Yankee. So what does all that those words mean? So condition 4 happened on Saturday. June 1st during hurricane season, we're always in condition 4. All that means is it's a heightened level of awareness. We're now in hurricane season. We are aware. We're shaking off that dust from the off season, and we are now prepared. We've gone through the checklist. We've got we're ready to respond in case a storm does come. Whiskey, X-ray, Yankee, and Zulu is what you probably hear a lot. So that the difference between them is going to be the timelines as to when sustained tropical storm force winds come. The key there is sustained tropical storm force winds. Will did a great job. He showed you out of all the products that they deliver, one of them specifically shows sustained tropical storm force winds. If you are only looking at one specific model and you're looking at the eye of the storm reaching, let's say, Canaveral, that's the eye of the storm. Depending on the size and the bands of that storm, sustained tropical storm force winds could be 48 hours prior to that eye of the storm actually coming. So when we're setting these port conditions, you might say, why are we setting these so early? Because that track model that I'm looking at, the eye of storm, is not going to get here for another day or two. It's because it's sustained tropical storm force winds is when we start shutting down the port. So the main difference between Yankee and Zulu versus Whiskey and X-ray is Yankee is 24 hours out, and it's going to be with restrictions. Restrictions meaning that vessels have to start heading one-way traffic. They're heading out. There's no more vessels coming in, as well as cargo operations need to be stopped 6 hours prior to setting Zulu. When we set Zulu, which is 12 hours out, again, from sustained tropical storm force winds, not the eye, that's when no traffic is happening. So I gave this brief last year. I know there's a couple of you guys out there that have vessels 500 gross tons. I'm not going to necessarily talk about this. Just know that the people in here, if you do have a vessel 500 gross tons, you know what I'm talking about. But there are specific plans and things that they have to do. Those organizations have to provide to the Coast Guard in order to be prepared for the hurricane season, as well as to remain in port when an actual storm comes. Does anyone have a 500 gross ton vessel in your organization that does not know what I'm talking about? Okay, that's what I thought. All right, so layup vessels. All right, so remain in port. These are the two remain in port liaison officers I was talking about. They are the subject matter experts at anything remain in port. So if your organization is getting a vessel, 500 gross tons in the near future, you can reach out to me, but these two people, Andrew Randall and Mr. Sanchez, will be the ones that you'll be dealing with in order to let your vessels remain in port when we shut down the port. All right, evacuation considerations for you guys. This is specific to here. I give these presentations for Jacksonville as well too. So this is something you guys need to be considered as you guys have the locks down here. And these are regulated by the state of Florida DOT, right?
No, Corps of Engineers.
Corps of Engineer. Okay. Thank you. I get that wrong every year, so I will make a note that next year. Army Corps of Engineer. Thank you. All right, so when the storm passes, everybody wants to know, when can we start operating again? When's that port getting opened up? I want to let you know that the captain of the port, the top priority, as well as life of the safety of life, is getting that port reopened. We got to get commerce going again. We've got cruise ships. We've got gas trying to get to Orlando. So know that our top priority is literally getting this port back open, but we cannot do it until it is safe for our operators to get out there. Once it is safe, as you heard Commander Brennan say, we have port assessment teams, facility assessment teams, waterway assessment teams. We work with a lot of the port partners here, like the pilots, the Army Corps, to get out there and start doing surveys and these assessments that we can get you guys back operating. And you're going to talk about the unified command specifically for here? Okay. So also what I did not say is that, so what we have during these hurricanes is we have a port coordination call that we conduct for the Northeast Florida, which is the Jacksonville, Fernandina area, as well as the East Central, which is you guys down here. And that, the port coordination, a lot of you guys are on those calls. It's an opportunity for you guys to hear the captain of the port, what she is thinking, as well as get feedback from all of you guys and what your guys' concerns are. So if you do not have, if you want access to that port coordination call number so that you can listen in, please let myself know. Take a picture of that. You can email me or get with me after this and let me know, and we can add you to that. But specifically to the Canaveral area, you guys have a unified command that I'm going to let Corey talk about during his presentation. But what they do is more or less they get together prior to we have our port coordination calls. So they have a lot of input before it gets to the captain of the port when we have our port coordination. But I'm stopped there so Corey can talk about that. Any questions specifically for me? Okay. Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, LT. Appreciate that. All right, next up, now we're going to transition to a lot of the landside preparations. We're going to pass it over to Assistant Chief Jeff Crawley with the Canaveral Fire Rescue.
All right, good morning. All right, so everyone did a great job. I just want to let you know that. Mine's going to be short and sweet and to the point, so hold on. All right, pre-storm, 72 hours, pre-landfall. We're going to prep all our stations, apparatus, and equipment, and we're going to open communications with CPA. 48 hours pre-landfall, we're going to assign shift personnel to our stations. So what we'll do is we'll assign two full shifts to the stations that will be there for the duration of the storm, and then we'll have one shift that's going to be at home that can relieve us once the storm has passed. 24 hours before landfall, assist in general population if required, and then non-essential equipment evacuated to the mainland. Pre-storm, 12-hour pre-landfall stations are going to be staffed with those two shifts that we're going to bring in. Personal vehicles will be moved up to the parking garages where they'll be able to keep their vehicles just to keep them from damage. And then the station's locked down when the winds reach 45 miles an hour sustained. That's a key point here for anyone who lives here. Just remember, once those winds do get to 45 miles per hour, we're not coming out. So if you decide to stay here during a storm, just be self-sufficient and be able to be self-sustained at home. All right, post-storm begins when the winds fall below 45 miles per hour, preferably in the daylight. Staff one personnel in the IMOC to assist with communications between CPA, BCSO, Coast Guard, and then Canaveral Fire. And then we'll perform a hazard assessment of Port Canaveral and mitigate any hazards. This picture here was from Naples. They were down there and they were actually gearing up to be a strike team. And then the storm turned. That was in 2022, and this is what happened to their station and their apparatus. So that was a pretty expensive problem right there. But you just don't know. You don't know what the storm's going to do. So you could prep and plan and think you got it figured out, but those storms can turn. And that's exactly what happened down here in Naples. After the storm, we will gear up. Once this area is cleared up and we have it all figured out here, we will get strike teams and we'll go. We've been to the Panhandle for Michael, and we've also been to Ian in 2022. We sent crews down there. We did a 14-day for Michael, and then we did a 7-day strike team for Ian. But besides that, we'll answer questions at the end. Thank you.
And in my presentation, as well as Byron, we'll drive a little bit more into detail. Canaveral Fire Rescue and BCSO integral part, as you all know, for closing the port and reopening it. Without either of them, we're not doing a safety assessment. We're not doing that initial life safety assessment. So we'll get into more detail in my presentation. But again, they're part of Unified Command, and without them, the port's not reopening. So pass it over to Commander Byron Keck with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office here at Port Canaveral.
Hey, thank you, Corey. And I will be almost as short as Canaveral Fire. So, so like a lot of that, we about 72 hours we start designating who's going to be in charge, getting some of our teams together. We're like everybody. We're like all of you. We have stuff. We have equipment that we've got to start thinking what we're going to do with it. If we're going to secure it in place, if we're going to take it out of the area, depending upon what the conditions are. So a lot of this stuff is fluid. Start going around MSOs, kind of designating some areas that might need attention, things that are going to have to be done. Of course, we start having our internal meetings with all our partners here in the port. Oops, sorry about that. How do I go back, Corey?
He wants to go back.
How do I go back? I don't want to touch anything, mess up.
You're probably going to have to go in reverse.
Oh, okay. Like I said, a lot of the same stuff. It's just getting 48 hours too. So we start directing our patrols of some of the more secured areas, start making preparations for all of our plans internally, our personnel, making sure everybody is set to go, because obviously we're going to have staff staying on site. Alpha Bravo staffing for us is bringing everybody in on 12-hour shifts. And so we'd have both of our squads in at the time. Usually we won't do that until post-storm. We'll start at a certain point, we'll start letting our MSOs go home, and we'll replace those with the deputy positions. We'll be taking our vessels out of the port, getting all of our equipment secured, continuing the meetings during storm landfall. Of course, we're going to have deputy response, and here on site we're going to have a contingency in Canaveral precinct, and then we'll also have deputies at the IMOC. So we will have deputies on site unless it was just the worst thing coming it was just really bad. Then of course we'd make some decisions at the time on what we're going to do. Our command post would be set up at the IMOC. Like I said, we would have personnel at both places, and then we would be preparing to coordinate post-storm. I start having our meetings. We start talking about reentry, assisting with the hazard assessment teams, checking all secure areas. And of course, I know in the past couple of years, we've worked very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers, because obviously we get our vessels out of here, the survey crew gets their vessel out of here, to try and get those vessels back in here quickly, first thing, so they can start assessments. So I know we're always in touch with the Army Corps, and they get us open as soon as they can. We'll escort those critical vessels back in here so they can start doing the surveys and hopefully get the port back open as soon as possible. A couple of things I would talk on too is just, well, I won't go into the bridges because that's probably going to be a question later. Phone lists. Go ahead. I was going to bring. You want me to? Okay. All right. So the question always comes up about the bridges. No, we do not close bridges. We will post storm. If there's issues, we're going to obviously control the bridges until we get any issues resolved. We don't want people coming back in with power lines down and roads washed out and whatnot. Pre-storm, we will not close bridges. So at last minute, if you decide you want to vacate and go across the bridge to the mainland, there's not going to be somebody there stopping you, because obviously we're not going to put our people out in bad conditions to stop people from exiting. Hopefully you've made that decision early, but know that yes, if you want to leave, you can leave. There's not going to be anybody stopping you. We have been very fortunate here in the last several years, like you heard from Will, to not have that direct impact. So even though we've been impacted, we haven't had that serious damage and effects that could be possible. So we have been very fortunate to allow our citizens back and have those bridges back open post-storm, to get people back in, because we haven't run into encounters. And we've decided here as a county with all of our law enforcement partners that we're not going to hold up reentry just because one area has a problem. If Cocoa Beach has maybe a serious issue with something going on, we're not going to stop reentry of all the residents back into to all the beachside communities just because of that one area. We'll work with them. We'll help get that area cordoned off to make it safe, to where everybody else can come in, and we'll just kind of keep that area secure. So know know that we understand that, and I know that's one of the biggest resistance sometimes with people leaving is because obviously the concern is your residents and whatever you have back at the house, not wanting to leave that. And we understand that, so we try and make it to where people can get back as soon as possible. And I did want to say, I appreciate FWC. I know the captain here for FWC and one of the lieutenants are here. We work very closely with them, and they're a critical resource post-storm and after storm, or that is the same thing, pre-storm and post-storm, on doing stuff here. And they've been great partners in helping us out here. So thank you all for being here. And yeah, and the other thing I'll say too, just from personal experience, if it's something bad, your phones, we all have our phones, we're so connected to them nowadays. Make sure you got a hard copy of your contact numbers, because if you lose networks and connectivity and all that stuff, your phone still may work, but all of a sudden, all those numbers in there, you've got no names. And if you're like me, I don't know hardly whose name is what number. So I've just got a bunch of numbers, and I don't know who they belong to. So make sure you've got a printout of names and phone numbers, because then the probably the thing is all of a sudden I know Peter, if he calls now, I go, oh, that's Peter. Yeah, I can ignore that. Now I won't know when he calls. I'll go, dang, I don't know who that is. Oh, it's Peter. So, but anyway. Just kidding here.
I feel the love.
So, I mean, you can see, again, the relationship that we have in the Unified Command where we can do that things because we know when time comes, we're all there together. Byron, thanks for answering the bridge question. I was going to put it out there as well. And so now this is my presentation. Again, I'm Corey Dibble with Public Safety and Security at the port. We're going to go over Port Canaveral as far as from a pre-post storm. But what I do want to say is this is not just CPA's actions. This is Unified Command's actions. This is what we expect from you all as port tenants, as the port community. And Byron did hit that, the FWC is an integral part. Although we operate Unified Command, that's just the decision makers, but there's all the field people. And as the incident grows, we bring in other agencies. So I just want to, it's not just those 5 that we mentioned earlier, it's the entire port community here. So what are we doing right now? Hurricane season started. We're doing planning, we're doing mitigation. Planning, we're having a severe weather meeting right now. Huge turnout. One, that means that everybody's not complacent, which is huge. I've seen this presentation have 5 people. I've seen it have 10. Every year, it's grown. And Will, again, you put a great presentation together for the National Weather Service, which goes a long way, so I appreciate that. And appreciate you all doing that. That's number 1. So without you guys being prepared, ready to go, then it's very difficult for us when a storm is coming. We're gonna start a monthly hazard assessments. They call them a HAZ ID, hazard identification, where myself, engineering, the Coast Guard, even the eyes and ears from you all in the port, what do you see? You see something out there. You see something that when we have increased winds, that's gonna become a missile hazard, right? That debris. We all know, number 1, there's lumber out there. They do a good job when a storm's coming, but we have to make sure that we continuously stay on that, because who remembers Matthew 3 days out, right on our doorstep? It's pretty hard to prepare for 3 days. Unless we're doing it now, staying on top of those broken lumber bales, the mechanical stuff that's on the side, the broken down vehicles, our own equipment, our own back doors. If we're not staying on top of it now, when we do have that approach that comes quickly, we're behind the 8 ball, and that's what we don't need. Get your own plans ready. We talked about at the beginning, we're only as prepared as you all are. Yes, we have our own plans, we have our own procedures, we have a great Unified Command discussion, but if we're telling you those things to do and you don't have your own individual plan, your own agency plan, then we don't respond because we're not resilient as a community. That's the buzzword that's been coming out for the last year, the last 2 years is resiliency. And no matter how strong we are as one agency, if the port community is not resilient, we're all gonna suffer. Identify the secure and staging locations. Canaveral Fire Rescue talked about it. We work together with the Sheriff's Office. Where are we going to put that fire apparatus? Where are we going to put that, $4.2 million piece of equipment? It can't stay out here, especially if we're going to have a Cat 3 or higher. We cannot lose that when it's a 36-month build time for a new one, let alone the additional $4.5 million price tag. Where are we going to put our survey vessels? We have a great relationship in Barge Canal. Survey vessel is number 1. Post-storm, Land and Sea, Tim Carlisle and his team, they come, they drop, they survey the port. Can't reopen the port without giving the Coast Guard sound data. The pilots are out there doing ATON checks with the Coast Guard ANT team. Order equipment, stockpiling these consumables, working with our purchasing department. As simple as a porta potty contract. If we wait till a storm's coming, we will never have porta potties out here. And we have to plan for that. If you remember Irma, we had catastrophic water loss. City of Cocoa's doing they're refurbishing their infrastructure, but the United States alone has old, aging infrastructure. So if we continue to rely on it without preparing for that mishap, it's our fault. So having porta potties in the fire station because they have the ride-out team, with the sheriff's office because they have the ride-out team. Food, water. Updating mutual aid agreements. These agreements that we have with the Space Force for generators, our DOT agreements, our Brevard County Emergency Management Agreement. We just updated the statewide mutual aid agreement, making sure that we can help one another in the event that a storm or any other incident impacts us. Ensure all vessels are aware of the evacuation requirements. This one's huge. Coast Guard talked about it. 500 gross tons or higher, you're under the direction of the Coast Guard. Lieutenant Wyford talked about that. Those that are under, we'll get in that a little bit more detail. You're under the purview of the Canaveral Port Authority with, direction of the Coast Guard. Harbor Safety Committee worked on a barge canal use plan, and it's been in the works, and we're going to finalize it, and we'll talk through that. Recreational boats have to be removed from the Port Canaveral Harbor if ordered an evacuation. Talked about the 500 gross tons of the Coast Guard. Regardless, if Unified Command does not issue an evacuation for those under 500 gross tons, Coast Guard's still issuing you out. So you have to understand that. We put this together 2 years ago. I think after, maybe it's Ian, maybe before that, Nicole. And we put together a flow chart. So those under 500 gross tons, particularly the marinas, understand how this evacuation flow chart would work. So if you look to the far left, we'll work our way right. Tropical cyclone forms. Again, cyclone. Could be a storm, could be a hurricane. Port Canaveral Unified Command tracks the storm. Right now we're in the clear. We go up, we monitor the storm for changes because we all know that can change. We see Port Canaveral has the potential for being impacted. We're going down now. Unified Command reviews the data. This is where Unified Command gathers the information from the National Weather Service and looks at impacts. We're not focused on the eye of the storm. We're focused on the impacts. Will talked about it, wind. More so for us, storm surge. That harbor is going to bring in that storm surge, compiled with the wind, and we have a devastating impact. So we're going to look at a storm. If it's an east-west storm, it's coming from the east, coming from the west, I can guarantee you without a doubt, you're going to be ordered to evacuate immediately. We're looking at the impacts. A west to east storm, depending on the impacts, we are going to discuss in detail with all of our partner agencies and determine if an evacuation is needed. We have sometimes, the last couple storms we have not, because of the approach of the storm, the impacts that we are expected. We did not want to put those under 500 gross tons into the river to create more issues near the locks and sinking near the bridges. So Unified Command reviews the data. We go up top, we issue a port evacuation order. Evacuation orders can be issued at any time. We want to issue them as soon as possible. We want to get them out before the Coast Guard gives whiskey, so you have time to plan, because we know that there's only 2 lifts in the area. We know that there's a lot of boats. We know that people have to have areas to go. We know the commercial fishermen have to put together a plan. So we want to give that to you as any time. But again, I hit it earlier, Matthew was 3 days. So sometimes it could be issued a little bit later. Coast Guard issues conditioned whiskey. All vessels shall begin the preparations to evacuate. Coast Guard brings X-ray. All vessels shall be promptly removed from the harbor. Coast Guard issues Yankee. All vessels have been removed from the harbor. Zulu, ports closed, no movement without captain of the port order. Then we just go down. Unified Command reviews the data. Again, let's say based on the storm, it's a west to east. We're not expecting a lot of impacts. We do not issue a port evacuation order. Again, this is 500 gross tons or under. All vessels shall follow guidance and requirements of the marina operator, regardless of what the port tells you. If the marinas tell you, if you are a boat owner and the marina tells you to evacuate, that is your CEO. The marina, that is who your contract is through, regardless if we don't issue one. If they tell you to leave, you follow the direction of who your contract is with. Coast Guard issues conditioned whiskey, X-ray, Yankee, Zulu. Remain in port requests. We put this together as well following the same storm. This is obviously in conjunction with the Canaveral Port Authority and the Coast Guard as far as direction. So hurricane season starts June 1st. Kyle already talked about those vessels over 500 gross tons should have already submitted their heavy weather plan to the Coast Guard. If they have any Annex H's they're looking at, they have that information followed through. So the Coast Guard is going to review those heavy weather plans, approves or denies, sends back for revisions. A lot of times, hey, there's not ample information, or they'll share it with us. Hey, does it look good? The Coast Guard is going to follow up with those who didn't submit. Make sure, hey, where is your heavy weather plan? Tropical cyclone approaches Florida. Coast Guard issues conditioned whiskey for Port Canaveral. Those vessels looking to remain in port submit request to facility owner within 6 hours of whiskey, Port Canaveral, for approval. It has to go, regardless if you're over 500 gross tons and you're looking for that remaining port, you have to, you're going to the Coast Guard, it still has to go through our harbor master, Cody, back there to approve in conjunction with the Coast Guard. That's the facility owner. So look at that red box. If the requester bypasses us as a facility owner, it'll come, be Coast Guard will send it back to us for review before it goes back to them. Going up, if we approve the request, Coast Guard may request additional information. You have your Annex H approved or denied. If we deny the request as a facility owner, going down, over there, the Coast Guard again could request additional information and concur, vessel must leave the port. And I just want to say, Kyle already talked about it, but these requests need to be made within the issuance, 6 hours after the issuance of whiskey. So those objectives, those priorities pre-storm, storm's coming, we're going to activate our heavy weather plan and unified command. So this is where, Kyle left it up to me. I really want to drive home the unified command. Peter talked about it. You have the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, Canaveral Fire Rescue, Customs and Border Protection, pilots, and ourselves, and the Coast Guard. That's for the hurricanes. That's for tropical cyclones. We're going to get together. I'm tracking these storms right now. Like, I am activated. I'm on, just like Will, I'm on the National Hurricane Center. I'm looking at different things. I'm just paying attention. I'm in close coordination with the National Weather Service, just gathering that data, what's out there. Any inclination, something could be coming. Everybody in the Port Authority will roll their eyes because I send out an email. I mean, I get it. But if I don't send out that email and say that there's something potentially out there, make sure you dust off your plans, make sure you have your checklist ready. I don't issue that checklist, then again, we're behind the 8 ball. So storm progresses a little bit more, unified command, now we get together and we talk through, all right, there's a little bit more data. National Hurricane Centers, let's say they put together, it's gonna form, they put together the form, the cones coming our way, there's potential for impacts, 5-7 days out. We don't meet a lot, but we start to discuss. And then as it progresses more, now we really dive into those objectives, those priorities, which is obviously clearing the port, making sure that we communicate to all of our partners. Cody's calling the commercial industry for an evacuation. I'm calling the recreational community for an evacuation. Ensuring the port is clear of debris. Again, we're doing those hazard assessments now. It's having a post check on all of our tenants and all of our parties in here that you are clear and ready for a storm. So I'm doing that hazard identification now, but our cargo department is staying in touch with our cargo tenants to make sure, okay, Unified Command's activated, we're tracking a storm. We need those lumber bales secured. We need to make sure that the salt pile, I'm just putting things that are out there at the tent. We need to make sure the Port Authority, our back door is clear. Whatever it is, we need to make sure that we have a post check with our tenants that, again, we're not behind the 8 ball. Phase closure of Port Canaveral businesses. When there is an evacuation of the harbor, this is something we want to clarify. So Coast Guard directs the harbor. So when they go to Zulu, the harbor is closed. If there's been no evacuation of landside, we are not closing the landside operations. Understand that. So, your business up is up and running because Brevard County did not order an evacuation. That's where there's a little bit of confusion. The harbor's closed no matter what when the Coast Guard orders at Zulu. Yankee, you're not doing movement without Captain of the Port order. At Zulu, you're closed. But we've had storms where Brevard County has not issued an evacuation landside because of the impacts, and it was basically downgraded and it was remnants. It was not a mandatory evacuation, it was voluntary. So those things do pop up, but I want to understand that. When we issue an evacuation, we're talking about the harbor. CEO can direct port closures, and we'll get to that if we need that, depending on the impacts of the storm. Continuous fuel deliveries to the last second. All this fuel is coming in East Central Florida. It's coming in Brevard County. We all know when there's a hurricane, everybody evacuates out. We're low on fuel. So we work with the Coast Guard to give the fuel terminal, the operational limit to continuously go as long as those trucks, which are independent contractors, are able to operate and comfortable to operate. I know it's a significantly increased since Port Canaveral has gotten their racks, but in Irma, we put over 550 in the last 24 hours before that storm approached. And then post-storm, number one is get the fuel terminal back up and running. Ride-out team, Sheriff's Office, Canaveral Fire Rescue talked about it. They're going to stay here depending on their safety, depending on the severity of the storm, the impacts, the classification. And they are going to be here for our life safety assessment, give us the eyes and ears of what happened post-storm. Again, if they're here, if they feel safe enough being here, to then notify us to recall our critical return members for damage assessment. And I will be notifying critical return members, which a lot of people in here are on, as far as storm progression, what to expect when we do have that evacuation. Hey, based off storm impacts, I anticipate coming back on X day at X time. And again, if you're not familiar, critical return A is damage assessment personnel. Very few people on there. And then there's a B1, a B, and then we're fully open. And I do want to stress, like, we have a great team in here, 100%. We've been able to reopen this port within 16 hours. But I do want to also stress that we have not been significantly impacted. In the event that we do have a significant impact, that 16 hours is going to be very difficult to reach. So I want to just preface, if we do have a severe storm, don't expect the same type of response as we've had in the past, where you're coming back the next day. Talked about the life safety windshield assessment, very, very key by Canaveral Fire Rescue and the Sheriff's Office driving around. They're looking for the down power lines. They're looking for any power outages. They're reporting to us so we can get FP&L out here immediately. They're looking for any roadway cave-ins, any facilities, metal sheeting, making sure that when we come back, there's nothing that's going to damage our personnel. Recalling the damage assessment teams. They're coming in. We've already done the life safety. Now it's that critical priority, focusing on the terminals, making sure that they're up and running. We got AJ back there with his team. They're coming in, they're doing with the contractors. They're coming out, checking the piers, make sure we can bring vessels back, working with the Coast Guard, doing that damage assessment. Restoring water power as soon as possible. Sewer services, making sure our lift stations are up and running. We can't bring people back that have been stranded on a cruise ship for 7 days if we don't have a sprinkler system in the in the cruise terminal. We have to set up a fire watch, which we had to do with Irma. Great relationships we have, we'll make it work. Prior to, Port Canaveral had generator issues. Now they're fully capable. They have been for the last 2 years. They're up and running immediately, and that's the #1 goal, is working with the captain of the port, Captain EY, to get a fuel vessel in here to reinstitute fuel operations in Central Florida. Everybody evacuates, we need to get them back in. Talked about the cruise ships. If they're stuck out there, I mean, although they have provisions for a couple extra days, it can get pretty hairy out there. So we need to make sure we get those people back, get them back into their cars, get them out of the community. So making sure our terminals are operational to the point to where we can just embark people. And then our business development team, Unified Command, will look at business continuity as far as restarting those operations. And then recall commercial and recreational vessels. They went to Barge Canal, the commercial industry, working with Captain Ryan Moore, giving them the plan, working with State Road 401 Drawbridge with DOT, working with the Army Corps and the Lockmaster, making sure that those that evacuated, we can get them back in as quickly as possible, because that is their life, that is their life cycle, that is their revenue. We need to get them back up and running, not only for themselves, but for our economy. And I just want to finish it with #1, as we talked about, it's been the underlying discussion in a lot of these presentations, is be proactive and not reactive. It's a community approach here. If we're not resilient as a community, regardless of what we do as the Port Authority, what the National Hurricane Center does, whatever information we give you, if you're not resilient as your own agency, we're going to suffer together as a community. So please be proactive, not reactive. That's it for the presentations. If anyone has any questions, I'll give it like a minute. I have a microphone. Again, it's being recorded. And then just before we end the meeting, we have Kyle with NOAA. After the recording's done, he's going to come up and I'm giving him 5 minutes to talk about charts. I know it's huge for you guys, a lot of commercial industry. So any questions for anybody that gave any presentations? All right, with that, John, please end the recording. I thank everybody. And I'm going to pass it over to Kyle real quick with NOAA to go over charts. Thank you, everybody.